and thank you for joining us for a discussion on the power of visibility to unlock collaboration. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with GitLab. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which we'll head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the communication channel. So let's get started with some introductions. I'm Jackie Liu. Until a few weeks ago, I was an engineer at Square on the platform engineering team, and I'm based in Brooklyn. Before Square, I worked on Nihilist N1, an extensible open source email client built on Electron and React. And today we'll be joined by Cormac, who is a senior DevOps evangelist at GitLab. Cormac is at GitLab, a leader in the DevOps market with an innovative single application approach to the entire software development lifecycle, from planning to deployment and monitoring. Cormac collaborates around best practices for agile transformation, project and portfolio management, and DevOps adoption. Prior to GitLab, Cormac worked at Microsoft, managing the data platform MVP community and helping to launch several developer tools in the Visual Studio division. He came to Microsoft through Xamarin, where he created the company's analyst relations program. And prior to that, he spent 2 years as an industry analyst, systems administrator, and software tester. Next, we have Marco Alacot, who is the director of engineering at Flywire. He is originally from Valencia and has over 10 years of software development experience, and he's passionate about building exciting products and high-performance teams. Out of work, you might spot him biking or running through the mountains. And then last, we have Raul Herbster, an engineering manager at Spotify. Raul has been working with infrastructure and architecture, providing support for developers with different backgrounds and in companies with different sizes, including startups and Spotify. Initially with a focus on mobile and embedded software engineering, Raul added more to his repertoire: backend, data, and management. He's an advocate for multidisciplinary software teams and would love to talk more with people about working on blending the culture. So yeah, today we'll be having a conversation about collaboration and specifically how we can foster collaboration through visibility. Meetings are really useful for a specific kind of real-time collaboration, but they're really costly and often they're not practical for scaling communication across teams and orgs. So we want to talk about how to do that through documenting work, broadcasting information, and sharing knowledge in other ways. So yeah, let's get to it. First, we kind of want to just get some background, and maybe each of us can tell everyone about your teams at a high level. So how many people are on your team? How does it fit into the larger organization? And what types of teams typically interface with yours? Maybe starting with Cormac.
Sure. And thank you for the introduction. I feel very fancy. So my immediate team is 9 members. We're spread across the EU, the US, and India. And we're part of a larger group of about 30 that sits inside of a marketing group of a bit over 100 and a company of 1,300, and we're all remotely distributed. And we interface with pretty much everyone since we're in marketing. So product, engineering, sales, and customers as well.
Cool. Raul, maybe?
Oh yeah. So I'm my team consists of, and then they are located in Stockholm for the moment, and we fit in the organization like what we call it Spotify tribe. But then we are responsible for infrastructure and tools, and also architecture for the mobile apps for Spotify. So, and then we in this tribe, we are about 10 to 12 teams altogether. Also, still work with different aspects of the mobile apps infrastructure. As said, like I work a lot with teams that work on architecture and design.
Cool, great. And Marco?
So my team, I work on the team that is responsible for all the like collection of funds. Flywire is a payments company, right? So that is our main focus. And we are about 25 people, including designers, including engineers, product people, and basically everyone. So mainly teams that we interact with is product. They are our main partners with it, but we also interact with basically all the company, marketing, sales, basically any team in the organization.
Great. Yeah, I think that helps a lot in giving some context. So yeah, I guess I'm curious, what are some ways that your teams have been able to collaborate and communicate work outside of meetings? What are some of the primary ways that you do that right now?
Okay, I'll jump in. So all of our communications, because we've always been remote and we're all over the world, time zones are an issue. So synchronous communication can be tough. So all of our communications are designed to be asynchronous if possible. So shared docs for all meetings. Meeting attendance is optional. Questions are posted in advance so that others can contribute asynchronously if they can't be there. We write down everything, but we don't use email for anything aside for maybe alerts for things. So almost all of our collaboration takes place inside either, ideally public GitLab issues, private when they have to be, or shared documents, usually in GDocs.
Yeah, one thing that has been helping us a lot lately. So we've been scaling the organization a lot in the previous years. So at the beginning, when we were a small group, right, and we wanted to make technical decisions, for example, it was easy. Everyone was basically sharing the same room because we were located in the same office and so on. So making decisions was easier, right? But as soon as we started to grow, making those decisions was significantly harder. Given the size, given that you have multiple teams collaborating on something, so articulating decisions at that period was difficult. So something that we try that is working for us is the RFCs. I don't know if you know what is the process. An RFC is basically a document that describes an idea and is written by someone that expects to get feedback about it, right? So an engineer could be proposing an architecture change and using a new library, something that is meaningful and that requires some feedback for other engineers. So we have a process where we write down that proposal, right? And we give some time for the rest of the folks to review it and to provide feedback. And after that period ends, we do a review. We discuss all the feedback, we change whatever is necessary, and we make a decision, right? So we are using that as a tool in order to, again, articulate making decisions when there's multiple teams or when, feedback is required. And it's been really helpful for us lately.
Are there certain types of decisions or how big does this decision have to be to sort of require an RFC?
Yeah, I mean, we are using it mainly for technical decisions. We don't have I wouldn't say it's not a matter of how big it is. It's more like if feedback is required, right? You have an idea about anything that you think could be improved, just an idea to try some technology, to change whatever process, anything like that. And you want to get feedback from others in order to articulate your decision, because probably making that decision happen, you need to involve more teams apart from the one that you are working on. So that's the trigger, right? We have that embedded in our process and in our culture. So when anything like that happens, the engineers, they do that on their own, right? In order to start a conversation.
Yeah, awesome. What about you, Raul?
Yeah, I said, my team is located in New York. Also, we have a big R&D office in Stockholm. So we talk a lot between New York and Stockholm. So this is an internal collaboration with the tribe and also external with other tribes that are located in London or whatever. So whenever possible, the very first thing that we try to create among the teams is a list of expectations. what they expect from us and what we expect from them. So we saw that this really makes communication later on much better, because we don't need to overdo anything else. We have a very clear list of expectations, and then we just like don't create what is not necessary, right? Yeah, I agree with Marco. We also use RFC. It's like a tool that's a process that really helps a lot on asynchronous communication and taking decision, because besides having all of this written, we also have all the track of the comments around what was said and why we went to that decision.
Yeah, it's also very helpful to track why a decision has been made, right? Because maybe in the future, years from that decision, there's some people that joined the company recently and they are curious on why we did whatever decision, right? So having track on all the RFCs is very easy, to go there and to understand the conversation and why we decide, to move on that direction.
It's also super helpful if you're ever audited or you have any kind of compliance that you need to or to deal with, even if it's from external partners, the fact that there's one referenceable, especially if you can look at the code change and say, here's the code change, here's all the testing that led up to it, but let's track it all the way back to the business decision and who was responsible for what. Exactly.
You can track all the backlog items after a decision to the original conversation. So you have full trace, on since the problem started until you resolve it. Yeah.
Is discovery ever an issue? Like, do these all live in kind of like Google Docs or something like that? Like, how do they get linked back to where people can find them easily?
So we just use a Google Doc. We have a template for the RFCs, which is pretty straightforward. It's just, we just compile who is part of the conversation, when the conversation happened, and very basic stuff. And after that, every item on the backlog that is related to it is linked to the original discussion in the Jira tickets, right? So when you have the user stories, you know where is that coming from, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I guess on the other end of it, are there efforts that you've made to scale collaboration that have not actually been effective? And if so, why do you think that is?
Well, for us, I think that it's not so much that the efforts haven't been effective, but that we've seen that scaling exposes the limits of any given tool. So Slack, or insert the kind of social solution of your choice. Slack is really helpful for us when we want to get someone's attention and kind of ping people and call something out, but it's a terrible place to actually make decisions because it lacks everything that Marco was just talking about. There's no traceability. There are a lot of data expiration and things like that. And it's just not designed as a knowledge management tool. So I think, and then public channels are slightly better than private DMs, because if you need to include someone in that, there's no context. And, so I think for us, it's been a matter of figuring out like, okay, this is getting out of control and it's tough to manage. So maybe we should use this for a more discrete portion of our multi-tool system.
Yeah, I can agree more on that. Yeah. At the end, if you think about it, Slack is just an IRC on steroids, right? So it's also a matter of expectations on what the tool is, but we felt on the same trap, like relying too much, saying that, okay, if we say this in Slack, everyone, should be aware, but at the end, Slack is a synchronous communication tool. So keeping track about everything, what is happening in the organization by just using a chat, right, is really hard, So yeah, I totally agree on what you say.
Yes, sometimes we use Slack also only for daily updates. If someone wants to keep track on like quick things that happened the day before, something like that, so then you can go to Slack. But back to the RFC, it's like where we really store all the important decisions and everything. But we still use Slack for like to sometimes replace a stand-up or a sync meeting that we should have with the teams that we are collaborating with.
Yeah, another example that is related with what Cormac was saying in terms of it's a process that we've been adapting along the way. So the all companies, for example, we have an all company meeting that happens usually every month. So the format that we were using early when the company was smaller and we didn't have that many locations, time zones, and so on, was not allowing people to participate in a good way, right? So everything was very passive. Basically, it was a meeting lead from a particular office, and we expected that any questions after that meeting should happen like during the meeting, but it was hard, for everyone on all the offices, to join the conversation and to participate, because at the end it was something that it was very passive for them, right? So we changed that in order to allow people to participate at the beginning, providing questions beforehand, and also rotating the locations where the whole company is based, so we can enable everyone, to participate in an easier way.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, so another thing that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is just about this problem of collaboration with different kinds of teams specifically, and that can look quite different. Collaborating with other engineering teams versus like teams in finance, marketing, sales, or product and design. And so, how do all of you think about balancing those kinds of competing objectives and goals, and also just how to communicate effectively with teams with different spheres of knowledge, different priorities? And maybe we can start with Raul this time.
Yeah, so we collaborate the most with, as I like, with internal teams, with other architecture teams, but also our main stakeholders are feature developers in the company. And yes, like they come to us through product with their requirements and everything. And as said, we use a lot of this expectation list from the beginning, so that we can really clarify how is going to be the output of the collaboration, what we need from them, and what they're going to get from us in terms of like how much time they can invest in this collaboration. If it's like only a daily sync meetings, or we expect them to sit down with the engineers all together, go through mobbing sessions, pairing, programming, and so on. But we need to have that very clearly. So we realize that, yeah, having this very clear and transparent list of expectation helps a lot to start. And also this is more with everyone that's involved, but especially with like the engineers, I also try to make them see why we are all together. Like what's the motivation all of this? What's the goal that why this specific person that works with architecture is doing something with someone that does feature development. So why we need to get from that. And then I think that clear out this potential, this pieces of information that can later on generate a lot of noise, and then we would need to allocate more time with more meetings to clarify some things. So I try to make this clear from the beginning so that we don't go and waste some time at the end.
How do these expectation docs normally get written? Is it just like independently each team kind of like writes up their own and then you kind of meet in the middle and see where they overlap, or is it sort of a collaborative process?
Yeah, it's like it really depends on like how much each team has to invest, like a kickoff meeting. So we try to make a very quick meeting, like 30 minutes in the beginning. And in some cases we don't have, so because of the time zone difference. So we have like with one team in Stockholm, let's say, another one in NYC, and then we work asynchronously to create that list for both teams. And then it has been like working really nicely, I believe. because at the very end, like I see like the importance of that, because at the very end, whenever we have like, oh, are we close to the end of the collaboration, and then we just like go back to the expectation document and all the answers are there. So like we for tech, we use that sometimes just like to clarify the definition of dawn in very overall terms, but of course we have product to give more details about that, but that also works really well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's kind of just like working backwards and being very, very explicit about what everybody is thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And especially like I realize that if especially feature developers and infrastructure and architecture developers, they have very different expectations about quality, about support, right? Like and other processes. So even though we are all developers, but they might not see the same thing at the end of the collaboration. The expectations are very different. The same you can say with like we're putting together backend data and mobile teams. Like also they are going to have very different expectations about quality level and so on. So yeah.
Cool, awesome. And yeah, Cormac and Marco, do either of you have thoughts on just collaborating with different types of teams?
Sure. Yeah, I think that I don't want to get so ditto to everything Raul just said. Particularly the shared understanding and kind of building that. I think that without getting too meta, there's this idea of the cross-functional team in most agile methodologies that needs to be extended beyond what we have thought of in the past to embrace the business stakeholders and all of that. And you can only do that if you're all on the same page. And I think there are some ways that you'll always have people speaking different languages. You know, there will be folks who are focused on sprints and story points, and then other folks will be focused on, you know, reporting quarterly to the street, and they'll be talking about dollars and timelines, like absolute timelines. But I think you can build some things into the process that make it easier for each side to consider the other. So as developers, we often think, you know, I need those folks over there in product or business or finance to, you know, inform my definition of done, for instance. But those folks on the other side also need something from you, you know, so a statement of value, like what's the value that this feature is going to deliver? Let's stay focused on that shared value. So at a previous company, whenever we were going to launch a new feature, one of the things we had to do to get any marketing support for it was we had to say, like, will this allow sales to sell to anyone new? Will it allow them, is there something new they can sell to existing customers? And just keeping that in mind when you were building features and planning it and looking at your backlog really helped tie everyone in together, so it was easier to have those conversations. So I think that, you know, whatever you can do in your process to be sure that each side is considerate of the other can be really helpful.
Yeah, totally agree on that. At the end, you think about it, if your teams are organized around objectives, right, instead of skills, like instead of having a front-end team, a back-end team, testers, and so on, all of those, as Raul was saying, they have different like visions on what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and so on. So, but instead, if you have the teams organized around objectives, regardless of their background, their skills, everyone is going to work, you know, towards the same goal, right? Everyone in the team is going to work towards the same goal, regardless of the background of them. Sorry. So that's the way we organize precisely, you know, to achieve that. And I think that helps a lot on the collaboration within the team. But it's true that when you have multiple teams collaborating to each other, and if you have competing objectives, you know, between them, it's really hard, you know, to align everybody on the same page. Problem is that when you have competing objectives, you are already in a very bad scenario, right? So what we've been trying to avoid that, and instead having objectives that are shared between different teams, right? One example could be, I don't know, marketing and finance, right? Marketing, they want to spend money, right, to to get more people using the product and so on. Finance could be, their objective could be to reduce the cost, right? But they need to work together, at some point. So instead of having them putting that in a situation where if one team wins, the other one loses, right? Is to be like a win-win scenario when everyone, wins, and everyone, is pursuing the same goal, which is easy to say, but hard to do in reality. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because when you say objectives, I guess, like, do you mean sort of like product areas, or what does that look like?
Objectives in any way, like it could be OKRs, it could be just plain objectives that you put. So it's about the goal, right? The goal that you are trying to pursue. So as I was saying, within the team, the way we organize the teams, we try to build them with all the skills that we need, to achieve those goals, right? So with that, the collaboration already happens, right? Because everyone, is trying to meet the same objectives, right? And on the other hand, when you are enabling collaboration across different teams, is what I say. Something that has been really helpful for us is to have shared objectives, right? Shared goals, right? So that way, at the end, it's easier, right? Instead of having competing goals, right? Because without a scenario, it's really, really, really hard, to enable collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Awesome. That's super helpful. Next, I kind of wanted to go into, we can kind of categorize knowledge sharing in two different ways. So sort of like push versus pull. And one sort of requires people to actively like seek out information by either searching for it in a wiki or Google Drive or whatever, or like asking specific people who have that knowledge. And the other sort of surfaces that information to people to absorb it as it comes. So that might be through like email announcements or Slack channels or things like that. How do you think about balancing those two? And have you found that to be a struggle at all?
I'll start, I guess. Yeah, I think it's always a struggle, but I think the struggles are different, whether it's pull or push. So pull, to some extent, is a UX challenge because you need to, if you have this massive information, out there, we have a 4,000 page plus handbook where it's mostly public, where we do all of our work. It's kind of the work we're doing, it's how we do work, it's why, and it's this living document. And there's a ton of stuff in there, but sometimes it's hard to know what to look for if you don't know what's there. So that is an ongoing UX challenge, creating a framework that allows people to find what they need and to know what's there. Push, I think, is a challenge of like almost self-control. Like you have to know what channels to use, and you have to do it judiciously. And I think it gets back to that idea of notifying people of what's out there versus trying to close the loop and seal the deal there. And I think it's all about context. So pushing information to people, if you know the context is right, like if you have a Salesforce automation app you've bought, and there's a salesperson walking into a deal and they there's relevant information they might want to know, then push away there. But I think otherwise, in general communication, you risk just burying people in things. So I think that setting up your systems and your processes so that you can push judiciously where it matters, and that the people who need to see it are actually paying attention, that you don't have 500 channels somewhere and there are so many notifications that nobody's watching. And I think that's helpful. It's necessary, but it also requires a lot of planning. And as much as I like doing things kind of in a self-organizing fashion, that's something where I think it really helps to have some top-down rules about how that should work.
Yeah, like I'm personally kind of curious about this question because Square and I think Stripe and a few other companies that I know of kind of have this policy of sort of like, you know, lots of different sort of email listservs that kind of get like all the information, and in theory you can find it all if you want, but in practice it tends to be sort of like everything gets filtered away and things like that.
Yeah, also like especially it's a very interesting discussion with my team too, because we collaborate with several ones plus the stakeholders. We also want to avoid meetings as much as possible, and also there's like a fatigue of information of like what is the status of each collaboration going on, how we have to, where we have to meet, and then like how we, and of course some like engineers they really need to know some important information to see the vision where we're going. So also to keep up their motivation during the collaboration. So I also try to decentralize in terms of like of information sharing. So sometimes we have some meetings with stakeholders and then with some other collaboration teams, or even like sharing in some different channels. Instead of all the team being involved, we try to have representatives of those teams, and then eventually they will come back to the team and share quickly in our stand-up. So especially now with this working from home situation, there's like a lot of like meeting fatigue and also information fatigue that are like we're trying to avoid.
I've struggled with this one a lot because it's really hard to find the balance, you know, between pushing all the context, all the information, everything that someone or a team needs in order to perform whatever, right? Against providing the tools or the context for that person to look for the information when it's needed, right? And I can give an example. For example, for the onboardings of new people in the team, some time ago we were doing an approach where basically we spent a good couple of weeks when the new hire joined the company, basically pushing, you know, all the information in terms of the business, in terms of different teams, you know, how everything works, processes, basically everything that you can imagine. The feedback that we got from that is that it was really hard, you know, to digest all that information, you know, because our business is complex, our organization is growing, so it was impossible, you know, for new hires to get that. So we changed that approach, and what we are doing currently is we provide a minimal set of tools and context at the beginning, but we are very clear on how to get more information when needed, right? And we also narrow the focus of the information that we give to the new hires, basically, you know, focusing on the area where they are going to work, right? And expand that area along the way, right? Instead of trying, you know, to do it the other way around, right? But again, I think it's something tricky. And to me, the key thing, as I was saying, is to have the balance, right? To find the good balance on this.
Yeah, definitely a problem with onboarding specifically because it's kind of like trying to go from whatever 0 to 100.
Yeah.
And,
you
really
want to go from 0 to 100 like super quick. You want to be like really helpful, right? But sometimes you are not helping at all.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, a few of you touched on this. Like visibility can be really important, but every person in the company sort of has like a finite amount of attention, and it's very easy to hit that point of information overload. So how do you think about prioritizing like what gets visibility and what doesn't in order to avoid that?
I think it helps to, I mean, this is something that we have struggled with. We've grown from 300 people to 1,300 people in the last like 18 months. And so a lot of this, it's much easier to shout when something's important when you have 300 people than when you're 4 times that size. and everything is a fire to the person who's in charge of it. So I think that again is where some level setting from the top down in the organization really helps, where someone says, this is what an emergency is, this is not an emergency. And then someone who, I don't know, ideally if you have someone who's skilled at building out like taxonomies of things, is someone who can say like, you know, here is how we're going to structure this organization, this information, and organize it, to Marco's point about like progressively revealing content. If you can do that with synchronous communications as well, and that's where things like a well-designed set of Slack channels can help, because then the people who need to know about it can be in there and treat those as important. But everyone needs to understand, I think, how they're using those tools and why, because otherwise you do wind up with people subscribed to 200 channels and you're getting notifications in the dog channel, you know, with pictures of people's dogs doing adorable things. At the same time, you're getting, you know, the systems down. You know, it's tough.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of a tendency to sort of, you know, think about like, oh, like I would rather share information with too many people than not enough. And, you know, that targeting problem sort of compounds a lot when you have that, like everyone doing that.
Well, and you're never going to know. And I think that's where the self-organizing part comes in. You know, I think I know who needs to know about something, but if there's a part of the company I haven't experienced yet, especially if I'm new and I'm onboarding, something important happens, you know, I can think of the 12 people I know who need to know about it. Maybe half of them don't, and that should be for them to decide. But then there are the 12 people who also need to know about it I haven't met yet. So I think that, you know, that's where, you know, knowledge management has to happen. The structure of it has to happen at a higher level in the company so that people can opt into the things that matter.
Yeah, for sure. What about Marco?
Yeah, I totally agree on the onboarding process, on the relation with the that the onboarding process has with this, because, for example, stressing or helping on how to navigate the organization is very important to me, because not only when a fire happens or when something, you know, when you need to communicate everything, if you have a good enough understanding on who should be aware of that thing, how can you contact that team or that person, and what is the format that is expected from you to communicate that, that really helps, you know, to narrow down and to reduce the noise, you know, when communicating about something. So yeah, completely agree on that one.
Raul, do you have any sort of thoughts on this? Might be frozen.
Yeah.
Let's see. So maybe we can talk a little bit about also, some of you have already touched on this, but sort of like knowledge silos that sort of tend to emerge in every org. Oh, Raul, you're back. Yeah, is there anything you wanted to say about sort of like how to address information overload? And if you also want to talk about knowledge silos too.
No, like about the overload of, I just like to add something on the process of onboarding. So yes, there is a lot of information, and then also Spotify has gone through this like hyper growth. One thing that worked pretty much like in our teams, like we have some onboarding events for R&D, for different people organized by AHR. But on the level of the teams, we also created what we call playbooks, which like has a list of everything that the team does, like stand-ups and everything. And then if you want to get some more information, you can go there. The team values, the team, you know, like things that if they want to know, they can go there at another time. So also we are very clear about, you don't need to get to know everything right now. This is the playbook, and then when you have time, you can go through that. Yeah, that's what I wanted to know, to say about that. About different teams, like different like silos, where to avoid the silos, and also like different backgrounds in the same team. I think it's very clear to make sure that they understand why they're all there together. Why I'm putting together like a data engineer with like a backend engineer. And then trying to talk in a very abstract level as much as possible, because when you go down to the details, we can lose. It's very easy to lose the attention of others. So whenever we can speak a common language, and we go through that, we go to that through abstractions. So that's like a better way to keep conversation.
Yeah, great. We just have a couple more minutes left, but yeah, does anyone have any other thoughts on sort of knowledge silos and how to prevent them?
Well, I think one thing that's working pretty well for us is documenting everything and having a culture where it kind of doesn't exist until it's documented, even if you're just documenting a proposed change or discussion. So we have that handbook where, you know, if I don't like the way we're doing something, I have a question about the way we're doing something, I want to make a change, I can go in and propose a change to the handbook. And then that becomes a merge request, which others will call pull request. And usually those are public, and everyone in the company and usually outside of the company can comment on that and have a discussion thread there. So that's really helpful. But I think having a culture where if I have this idea and someone says, great, I'd love to talk to you about this, why don't you write that down somewhere where everyone can participate, whether that's, you know, a change to the handbook or just creating an issue that's publicly available to everyone. If you get called on that enough and you get handbooked enough, as we use as a verb here, when someone handbooks you, they're like, yeah, it sounds great, go do what you're supposed to do, and then we'll talk about it. That has helped a lot because all of the knowledge, I mean, there may be silos in that you don't know the information's there, and so there's that discovery challenge, but at least the information is somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that first step is acknowledging that silos are not good, because this might seem obvious, but depending on the size of the company, you know, you have, for example, at the beginning, the situation where John is an expert on whatever, so everyone, you know, goes after John when there's a question about X or Y, right? And that might be okay, right? If you just have 4 or 5 engineers, right? The problem is that silos doesn't scale. So as soon as your company grows, your team grows, you are going to have a problem with that, right? So that would be the first step to me. And one thing that we've been doing to avoid them is rotating the people in the teams, right? You have someone that is an expert on Y, and you want more people to get that knowledge. What we've been doing is we've been incorporating new people to that team, so the knowledge, you know, can be spread across the organization, right?
To that point, actually, oh, sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
One other thing at a previous employer that was kind of cool to discourage silos and encourage sharing, they actually attached good behavior to compensation. So at this employer, 1/3 of your review was your direct contribution. 1/3 was your contribution to the work of others. And then another third was the degree to which you leveraged the work of others. So it really encouraged people to reach out, to share what they had, to be useful to other folks. And surprisingly, for the size of the company, it was very, very effective, because you didn't have people trying to keep information to themselves. They didn't want to be, that wise man on the hill with the, they actually wanted to share it and get it out there, because the company did better, and they did better personally as well as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also a really important element, like the cultural piece of it, just kind of fostering more of like a culture that's open to collaboration and prioritizes that a lot, and doesn't sort of prioritize like individual people sort of like, swooping in to save the day because only they know how to do X, Y, Z. Cool. So we are just about at time now. So unfortunately, we're running a little bit short on time. So I think we'll have to direct the Q&A here just directly over to Slack. But we had a really great discussion about using visibility to empower teams to collaborate at scale. And hopefully you've gained a few new insights about how to do that. All the knowledge inside of an org is only really useful if it's available and easily accessible to the people who need it. So I'm really glad we're able to hear from all of our panelists today about what has and hasn't worked for them. And we'll be taking questions now on the Lead Dev Slack in the communication channel. So head on there to continue the discussion. And thank you so much for joining, everybody. Looking forward to hearing from you on Slack.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.